purpose of the Flick Reedy Education Enterprises is to promote individual moral responsibility through education. How do we do this? We study and discuss the interrelationships of history, philosophy, social studies, and economics. We do not dictate. We do not make statements as to what we think you should or should not do. We do not unduly burden this program with footnotes, references, or complete documentation. However, we do give sufficient data to bring this discussion into proper focus. We invite you to delve further into the necessary historical and statistical data to develop a deeper understanding of truth and a keener sense of individual moral responsibility.
Well, now it's time to get into the area of economics. Why? Because much of the Marx-Leninist effort, especially in their indoctrinational writing and speeches, is in the area of economics. I believe that it was on an economic basis that Khrushchev said to Americans,
"We will bury you."
To save our freedom, we must understand basic economics. The socialists and communists have made a decisive part of the battle one of capitalism versus socialism. They intend to destroy capitalism. Second only perhaps to their desire to destroy a belief in God, Marx and his ideological offspring have always considered private ownership of property and the profit system as the greatest evil the world has ever known. This was brought out in the earlier discussions on communism and socialism. We have noted earlier that the great civilizations of the world grew, reached their peak, and then fell. Will ours fall? Will the trend away from capitalism be one of the main reasons our civilization falls, if it does? Remember the three basic reasons: moral, economic, and political decay. What does the word capitalism mean? Where did the term originate as it is used today? I believe Karl Marx created the meaning the word has today if the word did exist before his time. Previously, the concept of the economic system that we have was simply called free enterprise, or the free market economy. Marx was clever enough to know it would be poor tactics to openly attack freedom, so he coined or gave a new meaning to the word capitalism, and he made his attack from the direction that capitalism was cruel, unfair, inhuman. This is a method quite common to socialist communist tactics. They have destroyed or changed the original meaning of many words. Earlier we saw, for example, they have perverted the meaning of peace. To them, peace means the end of all resistance to socialism, communism. With capitalism, as with many other words, they have altered and distorted the meaning to gain their ends. We have received a long-range brainwashing about the idea of free enterprise and the profit system through the socialist communist attacks on capitalism. They have made it almost a dirty word. How do you feel if and when someone calls you a capitalist? The odds are that you are slightly ashamed and uncomfortable. Capitalism in these United States is a system in which capital, raw materials, energy, and tools is used to create goods and services to satisfy human needs or desires. All goods and services are voluntarily bought and sold. Webster defines capitalism as
an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of capital goods, by investments that are determined by private decision rather than by state control, and by prices, production, and the distribution of goods that are determined mainly in a free market.
So we see that Webster is not confused, nor should we be. At this point, we will consider a simple little formula devised by the American Economic Foundation, which helps us to understand economics. Their formula is simply MMW equals NR plus HE times T. Now, what does this mean? MMW stands for man's material welfare. NR stands for natural resources. HE stands for human energy. T stands for tools. The equation then says that man's material welfare, which measures the amount of the goods and services he can obtain, is equal to or determined by natural resources such as wood, coal, iron ore, agricultural land and seeds, and all manner of God's gifts, plus or used by man's human energy, physical and mental, multiplied by tools used by man. Does it occur to you, as you think of different parts of the world, that the standard of living or material welfare of a people is almost directly proportional to the number of and the complexity of the tools they have? This gives us some insight as to the correctness of the formula. To illustrate the formula further, a pioneer takes his axe and cuts down a number of trees, with which he builds a log cabin in which he and his family live. As you have already reasoned, the trees are the natural resources, the axe the tool of production, and the cutting and assembling of the cabin the human energy to create new wealth, a log cabin. The woodsman applied the principles of capitalism. He was a capitalist. He created a cabin, new wealth, something useful and desired by people, owned by and useful to human beings. A farmer does the same thing when he takes his tractor, planter, cultivator, and produces a crop from seeds. He produces new wealth in the form of corn, wheat, potatoes, beans, and so forth. The industrialist does the same thing when he builds a plant, buys machines and raw materials, hires labor, and begins to manufacture a product for sale. His product is also new wealth. The difference between these three actions is a difference in the degree of complexity of the actions. The basic principles are the same. This is capitalism in action. It creates new wealth to satisfy human needs and wants. That our capitalism has been successful in its endeavor to create new wealth is beyond dispute. What is perhaps just as significant is that the new wealth has been shared and distributed to a greater percentage of our people than in any other civilization in history. In short, the United States has been eminently successful under the capitalistic system. The abundance of wealth in the United States has been and is the wonder and envy of a world with a 6,000-year history of poverty and starvation. Never have so many people had so much, and it is due in large part to the economic system under which we live. This economic system can exist only in the climate of freedom. We must not be afraid or ashamed of capital or capitalism. We have the wonderful record of the greatness of our nation as proof of the pudding. Any shame which we may properly feel should be related to man's failure to live up to our moral, ethical, and spiritual principles. It's probable that occasionally man has mistakenly put material gain ahead of or in place of moral principles. But that is man's failure, not the failure of the system, not a shame caused by or to be blamed on capitalism. By her own boasting, Russia has claimed to be our economic rival, saying that she would catch and pass us in economic matters. Boyce N. Harlow, a few years ago, put together an interesting article titled, "If We Keep Up with the Soviets." According to Mr. Harlow, here is what we would have to do to be equal to Russia.
We would need to reduce steel production by 60%, just to be equal to Russia. Reduce petroleum production by 66%, just to be equal to Russia. Reduce production of electric motors by 95%, just to be equal to Russia. Reduce output of our hydroelectric plants by 66%, just to be equal to Russia. Reduce natural gas consumption by 90%, just to be equal to Russia. In addition, we would need to destroy 14 out of every 15 miles of pavement, 2 out of every 3 miles of mainline railroad track, 8 out of 10 ships, 19 of 20 cars and trucks. And this is not all. We would need to destroy 40 million TV sets, jerk out 9 out of every 10 telephones, destroy 7 out of 10 homes, reduce living standards by 75%, put 60 million people back on the farms, and then not produce enough food to feed the people of our nation. All this just to keep up with Russia.
Are you a capitalist? A great percentage of U.S. citizens today are capitalists. Although we have been deliberately conditioned to feel revulsion toward the word capitalist, let's set the record straight. You are probably a capitalist. The odds are very great that you are one. Many millions of people today, including those of very modest means, are stockholders in American business and industry. In some instances, employees of large companies own stock in the company for which they work. Ownership of the 100 largest companies in all lines of business other than banking and finance is widely distributed among individuals and institutions throughout the United States. About half of them actually have more stockholders than employees. In 1961, for example, American Telephone and Telegraph Company and its subsidiaries had 2,100,000 stockholders and only about 850,000 employees. Most people today have life insurance, retirement and pension funds, savings in a bank or savings institution, stocks and bonds. These are in reality capital because they represent short or long-range goods and services people need and want. Those funds do not lie idle. The various institutions holding this money for individuals use a substantial part of it in investments. The wide channeling of investments from these funds reaches into every phase of American business. This is capitalism in action to a significant degree. On what basis does this economic system of capitalism work? The first of 3 basic principles of capitalism is private ownership of property. The right to own property is one of our most basic freedoms. The Constitution gives the federal government no authority to take private property from its citizens. Further, the Fifth Amendment protects private property from confiscation except by due process of law. It is interesting to note the words of a man who is neither an American nor a property owner in his own right on this subject of private property. In May of 1891, Pope Leo XIII, in his papal encyclical titled Rerum Novarum, whose title in English is The Condition of Labor, established the following.
That right of property, therefore, which has been proved to belong naturally to individual persons, must also belong to a man in his capacity of head of a family. Nay, such a person must possess this right so much more clearly as his position multiplies his duties. For it is a most sacred law of nature that a father must provide food and all necessaries for those whom he has begotten. And similarly, nature dictates that a man's children, who carry on, as it were, and continue his own personality, should be provided by him with all that is needful to enable them honorably to keep themselves from want and misery in the uncertainties of this mortal life. Now, in no other way can a father effect this, except by the ownership of a profitable property, which he can transmit to his children by inheritance. The family has at least equal rights with the state in the choice and pursuit of those things which are needful to its preservation and its just liberty.
In socialist communist states, the principle of private property is renounced. Indeed, the economic platform laid down in the Communist Manifesto of 1848 by Marx and Engels proposed the abolition of private property. We also saw earlier that this was echoed in the platform of the Socialist Party USA when it was running Eugene Debs and Norman Thomas as candidates for president. Even today, there are economists who believe that capitalism is no longer a valid principle in economics, and who would rely instead on centralized planning and a state-controlled economy. A panel of influential university economists came up with this statement a few years ago.
We reject the notion That government governs best which governs least. The federal government is our only instrument for guiding the economic destiny of the country.
Who do you think those professorial economists believe most qualified to guide the economic destiny of our country? Why, themselves, of course. They have read all the books, said all the words, thought all the thoughts, and we aren't even going to be allowed to make our own mistakes. What do you think of exchanging an economic system based on free exchange of goods and services, which has proven itself for the past 200 years has given more people more things than any other system in history, for a system that has failed every time it was tried, including the early attempts at Jamestown and Plymouth? I'm sure that all of us have puzzled thoughts from time to time, trying to figure out which of several choices would be best for us or our family. Think of the problem of trying to decide what's best in every instance for every family on your block. Now extend the problem for every person and every family in your state, and finally extend it to every person and every family in the nation. Is there a man, or even a group of men, who can make economic decisions for every person and every family in the whole nation, and do a better job of it than each man and each family can do for itself? That's the real nub of the situation. That's the real question we must ask ourselves. And upon the answer will depend whether or not our nation will retain the principle of free choice by individual human beings. That's why the ownership of private property is so important to us. If we can't own and control private property, we are prevented from making those individual choices in determining what will improve our situation. The economics of the socialist communist states, where central planning determines what shall be done, who and where it shall be done, with little or no regard for the people's desires, has been likened to a blood transfusion from your right arm to your left arm, and spilling a whole lot of blood in the process. So let us record the fact that if the freedom of individual choice is to be a vital part of our economic system, one of the basic principles of that economic system has got to be private ownership of property. As Abraham Lincoln said on March 21st, 1864,
"Property is the fruit of labor. Property is desirable. It is a positive good in the world. That some should be rich shows that others may become rich, and hence is just encouragement to industry and enterprise. Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own shall be safe from violence when built."